Good morning, everyone. That is right. It is early. This is probably like one of the earliest recordings that I've done, but I'm really excited about it. I actually think I was not able to like sleep much longer because I was, anticipating this really lovely conversation that I get to have. So, welcome back, everyone, to the Sober Witch Life podcast. It's been a hot minute since we've actually recorded a show, let alone had a guest on, because I was traveling for 2 weeks. So, yeah, that definitely makes it challenging to find the time. So, welcome back. Super glad to have you, and even more excited to have today's guest. I was very honored and privileged that I think it was maybe 3 months ago.
It's been a while. Yeah,
It's
it
been
was.
it's been a while. We did an introduction call and just super delighted, and so I'm excited. I would love to welcome to the show. We this is how we do this. But Justin, my dear friend, can you tell us a little bit? Who are you? Introduce yourself to the audience and let us know. You know, who are you?
Oh my gosh, who am I? That is a profound question. And firstly, Sunshine, thank you, and thanks to the audience for allowing me into this space. I shouldn't say allow, but for being in this space with me, and me as the guest, and I'm humbled by that because yeah, I have a story. It's an interesting one, and hopefully it's an inspirational story or a story that might give people little nuggets to take away. And so about me and who I am. Uh, I will put this all in the context of what the overarching theme of the show is, and that I was a traveler of the experience that led me to do things in my life that I have no regrets about, but at the same time were not healthy for me. They were counter to my well-being, and so this all started in childhood with an adverse family situation, domestic violence in the home, and unusual domestic violence. It was the male that was the battered and the female that was the
Mm.
batterer. But I whipped that up as a young creature, and that it was in continuity for years. It just kept going, and finally they separated. And at 6 years, 7 years old, I was pragmatic enough to realize there would be peace in the home finally, hopefully. And so I think that might be one of the sort of the underpinnings of what led me to move in a direction in later years, starting probably around 13, with being curious about inebriants and intoxication and things like that. Um, I'll spare the gory details from there, but about 13 is when I began my entree into that into that life. So to move forward in time a little bit, one of the other reasons that I'm here is part of on the other end of all of that. I had a profound, serious impact on my life. And when was it? 2011. I was 41 years old, and I had a chemical brain injury, not from substance use, but just a happenstantial chemical brain injury, and it messed me up. It really messed up my headspace, and I was having a lot of neurological complications and deficits and pathologies and things like that. They couldn't really pin it on anything specific, but speech fluency was lost, short-term memory was lost. I had ataxia. I couldn't walk very well. I thought I was just going to be a vegetable and end up in a nursing home at 41 and be, on a tube or spoon-fed or whatever, because I was just shutting down. So anyway, that was an interesting moment in my life, and in hindsight and in reflection, I call that the master that showed up in my life. So I'm sure a lot of guests that come on and have conversations with you have recovery stories. They have stages and steps. Mine was a sort of basically a sledgehammer, literally to the head. And the beautiful thing on the upside. Now, I will say that prior to this moment, I think it was October of 2011. I was not using much, so that's like a big thing, right? I was drinking a little bit, not using um, any illicit substances, but just having a couple of beers a week or whatever. But anyway, I had, again, a deep, profound history with substance use and alcohol misuse. And after this brain injury, if I took anything, there was zero tolerance for it. Alcohol would have a horrifying cognitive effect on me, and anything, opiates, cannabis, things like that, which is absolutely horrifying, experience or phenomenological response to it. So, excuse me, that was my recovery program. It's like Mother Nature said, yeah, you're done, and you're not going to, because underlying that moderate use that was still there, I was an angry person, I was a reactive person, I had all that
Mm.
juice inside of me that was what I self-medicated for 25 or 30 years. And so that had to be dealt with, it had to be reckoned with. And that's where the uptick of the story goes, and the trajectory went up. As you know, I have a talk show or an interview series myself. It's not a talk show, it's more of an interview series. And I have had conversations with some absolutely amazing and incredible people who are, if we were to put a big banner around it, are in the well-being pursuit. They are cognitive scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, people in philosophy, as well as artists, TV and movie, as well as the media arts, painting and sculpting and dance and music and things like that. So people who are just really embedded in creativity. All of that was the ends sought in that were to radiate or broadcast this idea of well-being, absent of what we've all dealt with, and what we may be continuing to deal with. So I'll pause there, and that's probably a good revelation for what we can do
Yeah,
with
I
this
mean
out.
that is I'll just kind of like, you've gone through a journey that I think a lot of us can relate to, uh, regardless of the substance use or not. But this journey where things became very difficult, challenging, and your life really had to change. Like you had to change how you lived. Um, you said not to kind of go there, but we've got some time to chat. So you said that you once upon a time in your life you did use substance, right? And what did and because I want to, we'll go into the comparison and get into that, but like, what was that like? Like when you were trying to kind of escape even that anger, right? Because I think that's why some of us use it. We don't like feeling angry, right? We don't like feeling all of that, harsh kind of emotional response. What was it like back in that point? Like, what were you like before the chemical brain injury and that, who is that Justin?
I think the Justin that was the substance user or the party animal or however we want to frame that. Here's an interesting insight. Before I even got involved with drugs and alcohol, at 7 to 10, somewhere in that range. This was before Reagan. This was before the Say No thing and all that, and Dare and all that. There was a drumbeat of abstinence still going on in the school systems and in media, advertising. You would have these ads and blah blah blah. And again, it was a different vibe, but it was close to the Dare, pre-Dare. And one of the things was about marijuana, and it was like, oh yeah, marijuana that does this, and this, and I'm like, oh, oh, so I can damp down, I was actually reading it as like what a doctor would say when they're prescribing something. I'm like, oh, and again, and of course I was a child of the '70s, and it was much more. It's kind of like now. There's a much more liberal attitude towards, let's just say, cannabis. And in the '70s, it wasn't a big deal because of the '60s having, pretty much thrust all that out into the milieu. So I can remember a pivotal moment in my life where I thought, geez, if I just smoked dope, I wouldn't be so whatever, whatever my affective states were at 7 to 10. I can't remember the exact time. So then when I finally started, the first thing I engaged with was alcohol, and again, that was at 13. I just remember just going into mom's liquor cabinet and turning up a bottle, and finally, for the first time in my life, I felt, oh God, Jesus, what a nice time out from being whatever the underlying psychic mechanisms were, like anger, rage, fear, sadness, depression, whatever my stew was back then. But I can just remember being jettisoned out of that for a moment and thinking,
Mm.
I can feel, whatever it is, it's like pleasant, or happy or whatever. So there was, and I'm a hedonist, I like, even in early childhood, we used to tumble down the hills and love getting dizzy, and whatever, I think I was sort of destined by my behavioral disposition, my psychic profile, like, the canoe scale, like whatever my matrix is. I think between that and the abuse, because there was a lot of emotion, not just between the two parents, but between a manipulative, draconian, what I can casually say is maybe a covert narcissist parent, that just really head effed me, and it's no, I lay no blame at their feet because they were severely, both my parents were abused as children.
Yeah.
It's just the lineage, it was just
Yeah.
passed down. So 13 to 14, alcohol, and then at 14 started ripping bong hits and finally got introduced to marijuana, and that was great because then it was like, well, this is better than alcohol because I don't feel, pasty afterwards or whatever. So there began a career in my mid-teens to late teens, early 20s of just, alcohol and marijuana. Cocaine was too expensive, but, a little sniff here and there. Took acid and mushrooms just to see what was up with that. I had a lot of, and not to glorify anything, but I had a lot of fun on acid. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't and I don't think any of us, substance users, like the original part, the beginning part of the journey was not the hell, right? Like, hell, like we start at a carnival with, all of the lovely noises and the fun games and all of that, and it isn't until some point in that journey that we end up in, the fun house of mirrors and the scary one, and yeah, so it's interesting, and I've had this conversation, I think, with handfuls of folks, but it was popping into my mind as I was listening to you. Um, and I don't want to glaze over what you're saying, but it sounds like you, in retrospect, looking back, could recognize as a child you were like empathic or highly sensitive,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
very much, yeah.
And so I'm just curious because this has been my perspective, Justin. Like when you live in a house, when you are a highly sensitive child, when you're empathic, when you do have heightened psychic senses in whichever way they show up, and then you're around individuals, meaning your parents in this point, that have very intense emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to me, like I know this is part of where I was trying to escape from, right? Like
Yeah,
not only do I not know how to feel, I have zero idea how to process these emotions. Like these are so adult in comparison to me being a child. So I'm curious, like, what was that kind of experience like as a kid to know, like in looking back, that these big emotions you were around were something that you were, kind of, I mean, forced, right? We're forced to do it. Like, but you had no tools to navigate that as a
mm-hmm.
child.
Mm-hmm. I knew how to vent rage, because
Mm.
again, once the male parent had the sense to leave, and my greatest regret is that he didn't take me with him, but no judgment, he did what he had to do. But I was left in the house with that person, and and it's not like this was 24/7, but the enduring history of, in relating with this person, and I eliminated contact with this person about 23 or 4 years ago. So, and I, as far as I know, they're still alive. So anything I say is not meant in malice or judgment towards this person. Again, they were a highly sensitive person too, I would intuit, and they were destroyed. Their soul was just absolutely destroyed, and what filled the vacuum was this system of, defensiveness and walling up, and rage, right? And
Mm.
so that I sort of inherited some of that rage and frustration. But to get more to your question, super sensitive kid. I would go to graveyards and read headstones and just feel the life of that person and feel, I that's, like an early memory of empathy is I would just feel that person. I would read their
Wow.
death dates, the note from the family or whatever, and I would just feel it, and I'd be like, wow. So I went from that to, for means of survival, going more over into sort of the sociopathic end of the spectrum where I didn't care, and
Mm.
I had no sense of what, I felt no love, I felt no, um, I knew happiness. I could hang out with my friends and be happy without, go to pizza party or whatever, and without getting high or drinking or whatever. But so I knew some modicum of expression beyond either shutting down and being again not quite sociopathic, but just somewhere on that spectrum, and being a rage case, where you're just all it is anger. So yeah, I had to pivot as a child from being a sensitive, open soul to someone who had to better, buttress and defend and make sure that we wouldn't get injured.
Yeah.
We could handle the shock wave when it hit, that kind of thing. When the rage came externally from, let's just say, the parent or other, like bullies in school, because like bullies in school never bothered me. I'm like, come home with me, little, come on, I'll show you, right? But anyway, you had to work to make sure that you survived emotionally to the next stage.
So I'm really curious because you've got this age range of in your teens where you started your like substance career, right? And you're describing how like some of this was like you were conscious and aware that it was changing your state of mind, right? And that was by choice.
Oh yeah.
But you've still got from that age to 41 before you like really, you know, have this drastic change in your life happen. Like what did you how did you see yourself in that time in that time frame? Like right, looking back, it's a different story, right? If you could put yourself into, I don't know, I'm going to say 25-year-old you mindset right now. What did you think of yourself? Like what was your view of self at that particular point?
25 was a transitional period for me. Prior to 25, I'd say from 16 to 17 to 23 or 4, I was deeply depressive and deeply self-loathing, nihilistic, self-destructive. As I mentioned before we hit record, I came up with a lot of creative ways to make it look like an accident, and
Mm.
I won't go into the gory details or give anybody inspiration, but yeah. And I had overt steps taken to take myself out too, but fortunately, I played roulette a couple times. It's like it didn't, and obviously I'm here. So, but 25 was a period of emerging from a 7 to 8 year period of just being deeply depressed. And part of that depression was driven by the fact that I didn't do really well in school. I didn't end up, going to college, and well, I took community college classes for what I thought I needed just to function as an adult, but didn't get a bachelor's or a master's in anything. And that was one of the things that was sort of drummed in by the parents, that, hey, your next move is to go to college and da, 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 da. But I was way too dysfunctional, and I was dyslexic, or I am dyslexic, whatever. And so conventional learning was very difficult for me. And so to deal, I suppose, with these uh, harsh self-criticisms and judgments about, well, you didn't measure up, you didn't do this. Now, conversely, and in hindsight, I in high school started working in kitchens and restaurants, and I just learned, and I learned how to be a chef. And so I owned a restaurant for several years. So I managed to do something with my life. I just didn't, have a dead end job or anything like that. So there was accomplishment. I'm not ashamed in the least. In hindsight, again, I'm almost 57. Like I did well. But at the time, when you're depressive, you don't see it any other way. You're like, oh, you're an F up, you're a fail, you're blah blah blah. So again, at 25, I was coming out of a shell, so to speak. The substance use in the early to mid 20s had tapered off. Like there were years of sobriety where I would go to the gym and work out and be physically healthy. And so I was very selective. I mean, it wasn't like, up until about, like it's really ironic. At 21, I kind of sobered up, right? Like I had done all the drinking and the drugs that I could stand from 13 to 21. And so I kind of, chilled out and got into healthy things.
That's like a really really interesting thing that I've watched, right? Being around folks in the recovery community, I've heard a good chunk of conversations of people that throughout their early teen years and then all the way up to that 21, 22, right, did a whole shit ton of substance, and then they hit that early age and they're realizing if they continue to go down that route, right? It's, yeah, it's not the path. Yeah, like, so when you that early career has woken some folks up of making a drastic change. Um, I'm curious, like, because you're saying, like, being in this darkness, when you look, and I pulled 25 out of the air. So there's something there that I think folks need to, how did you, what was the shift? What was the switch? What, like, how did you go? Because that's not an easy thing for a lot of people to do, right? That, there are a lot of people that, don't get to have the story that you have right now, that I'm still here. So what was it within that time frame that allowed you to, like, stop playing roulette, so to speak?
Well, I'll bring in interpersonal relationships to the equation. So there was the depressive, self-loathing, nihilistic, failure, idealization kind of thing, and parental residue kind of thing going on. But also in interpersonal relationships, I've been with a couple of gals, and but nothing serious. But part of that depression is that I didn't have a partner because of the empath, I think, in me. I wanted to relate, and so there wasn't a whole lot of that going on. And I think
Mm.
that was one of the motivating factors, is that I just had a little talk with myself, and I said, well, if you want to have a productive interpersonal relationship with a partner, romantic relationship, you got to square a few things away, because you're not going to be attractive to people if you're like Eeyore the donkey, or whatever your deal is. And so I was obviously motivated to get connected with somebody in that sense. And so I think I had that moment between 24 and 25, and I was actually engaged to be married to somebody at 24. So
Mm.
this wasn't about like me being in droughts or deficits of interpersonal relating with romantic partners. I'd had somebody, but I kind of got this memo internally that's just like, what are you looking for? Who are you looking for? What kind of relationship are you seeking? Because the failed engagement to that one individual taught me some lessons about who I was, and all of that, and I'm grateful to that person for that. But then I went out and I just had fun, and I dated probably 3 or 4 different people, nothing super serious. Then within a couple years, I met the woman that I'm married to now. We've been together almost 30 years, and so yeah. So, but it took that sequence of events of sort of, this is perspectival lensing of the outer world and the interpersonal relationship dynamic, to say this means of seeing
Mm.
yourself and others is not working. And again, it took a failed engagement to someone, and two hearts getting broken, and yada yada, to sort this all out. But then from that period forward, I had a renewed perspective, a new way of framing and lensing everything, which lent me to have a healthier perspective on what I wanted in life, as well as the partner that I would best be fitted to. Um, you know.
Uh, I'm curious, Justin, how would you describe your relationship with, like, spirituality at this point?
Starting again in mid-teen years, this is a good story, because when I was 15 or 16, I'm sorry, I met a guy named Lee Stone. He's an artist. He's still alive. He was at a art show. I grew up in suburban Washington, so this was at the Montgomery Mall in Bethesda, Maryland, 1986 fall, getting ready to go to the 10th grade or 11th grade, whatever I was going into. And I met Lee at this thing, and he had some really neat art. I started up a conversation with him, and prior to that, I was kind of fallen away Catholic. I told, my mother called me one day when I was 15. She goes, "Are you still going to church?" Because I was living with my dad, and I'm like, "No." "Why not?" Because I don't want to. And that was it. That was the end of this. That was my end of my relationship at that time with Catholicism. And so, so fast forward back to Lee. He had some crystals, and then he had this Robert H. Monroe
Mm.
Hemisync tape, right? Hemisync. He gave it to me. He's like, "Dude, try this." And I was like, it was kind of like, "Hey, man, go ahead and take a line of this and see what you think," right? Because that's my mindset. I was doing a lot of drugs. And so I was like, oh, so if I meditate it's kind of like getting high, but I don't fuck up my body. I hope I can say F words.
Oh yeah, you can.
Okay, thanks. So I don't screw myself up. And so he's like, try it, see what you think. And so Robert H. Monroe, I think that's his name, the
Yep.
Monroe Institute. It's about journeys. It's like exteriorizing. And I'm like, oh wow, that's better than any acid I ever took. I can, woo. Although I had tried PCP one time, and I did leave my body on PCP. So I'd already been there and done that. But I'm like, I don't have to take drugs to do this. I can do this naturally. So anyway, I'm being dramatic, but that was a flashpoint in my life, in all the little instances of my life that thank you, Lee, for doing that. Because I really got into it, and I meditated, like 2 or 3 nights a week with the head. We had Walkmans back then, and I put the tape in, the cassette tape, and do the meditations, and I loved them. I thought they were just the coolest thing in the world. And he gave me a little crystal, and I had it by my nightstand on my bed, and so that became integrated into my system of drug use and all of that, and so it actually moderated or tempered. It gave me another outlet. So from that, I built up. So my father got very much into the New Age movement, and in the late '80s, early '90s, and I kind of followed along with that. I went to workshops with him and seminars and these different people. I even went to Sedona in like the early '90s and did the whole thing out there. And it was mostly because I was hanging out with my dad's generation. They're all a bunch of freaking hippies, they're barking at the moon, and it was fun. I loved it. It was just so cool. And so I can pin that and get to where I am spiritually now. But that's the sort of background genesis story, is that I was sort of New Age adjacent, spirituality adjacent, and immersed as well, given different time periods and different vectors, like where I went and what I did. So that's the background. And
Yeah, I love I I really love because in my head what I see is these bouts of like sobriety and this shifting and this changing in that early age. I I would equate that to like you finding some comfort for your spirit, right? Like it really feels, and I think, and I just want to like emphasize this because I think that, um, again, your relationship with, substances, it's not like it changed overnight. It's not like you just woke up one day and, like maybe you did at 40 something, right? And I think a lot of people have this harsh judgment of self when it comes to their substance use. Like when they start thinking about it being a concern, like it's just supposed to naturally go away, right? But the reality is until we find something else that brings us comfort of what I would say mind, body, and spirit, it's hard to leave the substance behind,
oh yeah,
right? It just is. So I'd love to fast forward because we could probably, have a 2 3 hour conversation about all of this, but I'd love to fast forward to, so you make this change like 25, you've now got a new perspective maybe in life, you find love, but you're again at 41 experiencing life, potentially being robbed from you.
yeah,
I would imagine that's what it would have felt like, right? You described, I'm just going to go to a retirement home and be fed on a tube. Like, I mean, that's like life being robbed of you. And I think, even though you weren't using substances in the same way at that particular point, I think that's what a lot of folks that are struggling to step into recovery feel like when that's how they would describe a rock bottom, right? Life is being robbed of them, right? So I would love to go to that point and like what did it really, if you thought about the both the mental and the somatic, the body lead sensation at that 41 years old of when that happened, like what was that experience like, right? What were the emotions? What was the physical, like, I'd love for you to share with us, like, what did, for lack of a better way to describe, what did your rock bottom, you know, um, what was that experience?
yeah. One thing I might want to amend or put on the front end of what I'm about to say is that the 20s were kind of rosy and fun, and I was drinking back then, and I didn't really do anything else, but I was more of a, probably more than I should have, social drinker. And then when I hit my 30s, my wife and I opened a restaurant in 2002, and that put a lot of like external pressure on me. So I started getting angry because I was this sort of spiritually interested person and active person, and my restaurant, I was constantly struggling with it. It wasn't never failed. I mean, it was just, but it was never, that ideal thing.
The
And my,
restaurant industry is probably
oh
the
Jesus,
yeah, it's probably one of the most difficult.
yeah,
Yeah, my partner is uh, I'll say retired chef,
okay,
20
okay,
25 years.
okay,
Yeah, and so I'm very, very familiar. I've a very dear, one of my best friends owns a restaurant herself, has for
yeah,
10 years. So I'm like, we've had lots of conversations, not just of the stress and the challenge, but also how so much of that stress and challenge is met with substance.
yeah. Well, that's what happened. It flipped
Yeah.
the switch on me again, and I went back to being 17, 18 years old again.
Mm.
Drank every day, a lot, and just because it was the stress, and not that stress is an excuse, but that was the machination at the time, and so that led. We did the restaurant for 4 years, and so I was in that pattern of abuse, and then it gets better. It gets more interesting. I had friends, and prior to the restaurant, I owned a landscape business, and we did design and install, we did maintenance, we did all these different things. And during the restaurant, we also bought a newsstand, so because my wife was getting burned out by the restaurant, so she went over and ran a newsstand around the corner while I ran the restaurant. And again, sold the restaurant after 4 years to some friends of ours who wanted to do something in town. They were moved out of town and came back, wanted to jump into the turnkey. And so we sold it to them. And then I got back into landscaping. Well, when I got back into landscaping, I had a casual friend that I had known because I'm into botany and horticulture. And he had 6 acres. He had a nursery. He had all this stuff. But he was also a massive, massive drug addict. And he was addicted to being addicted, right? I mean, this guy was poster child for drug use. Like, long storied career because he was probably about 12 to 15, 13 years older than I am. So anyway, I got in his orbit, and they got into a car accident, got turned on to oxycodone, and
Mm.
became a different kind of drug user. Before it was just marijuana and the odd psychedelic, but then they got into narcotics, and that's around the time that I was hanging out with them. So they were constantly abusing narcotics, and I was hopefully prudent enough, in hindsight, I was, that I didn't use those narcotics with them very often, as often as they did. But I did use OxyContin, heroin, methadone, Dilaudid, all that stuff, and probably twice a week for me, and every frickin' day for them. They were full on
Mm.
intermediates, yeah, and hard. And I'm still friends with the one guy. The one died, the owner, and then still good friends with the other one, and he doesn't do that stuff anymore. So there was my probably my that was my last chapter of substance misuse and abuse, etc. Was that, so that's leading us back up to 41. So 30s were this hot mess of that,
Yeah,
doing.
before we jump into that, I would love to hear your answer to this. How did you feel about the life you were living in the restaurant? Like shit, like how did you feel, right? I'll share the reason why I'm asking this. I have some theories and beliefs that uh, are running away, and that can be in all sorts of different formats,
Right.
is often because we are living a life out of alignment,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? How did you feel about this life that you had chosen, right? Like you made the choice, you're an adult, but how did you really feel about that life outside of the substance use, outside of saying I was using substance? How did you feel about the choice of letting go of a landscaping business, running a restaurant, having your wife burn out, letting her go and do something else, and yet you're still having to figure out how to get out, get into something else? How did you feel about your life at that point?
Yeah, yeah. this is an interesting, psychological, putting cards on the table, because the one of the perspectives or affective states that I may have had was a sort of vindication that this was not just in the failure, this was just in the accomplished, that Justin opened from scratch, and his wife did a lot of the heavy lifting, with, co-equal heavy lifting. Managed to get a restaurant started from scratch, run it, not fail, and just like the landscape business that we were in prior to that, we ran that successfully, sold it, moved on. So it was a dichotomy in that. Yes, I'm vindicating that Justin of 16 to 21 who was depressed because he was, shit life, blah blah blah. So there was that. Then there was the Justin that was just on the precipice of being traumatized by this whole experience. I'm a tough, thick-headed so-and-so, but this was a button pusher, as you said. You're aware of that, personally. And so yeah, there was that. We were all, and bless my wife, she just was smart enough to get out and go do something else. But she was still burned with a lot of the bookkeeping. But at the newsstand, it was quiet enough she could, take care of the odd customer and manage books and run ledgers and things like that. And meanwhile, I'm in the melee with the front of the house, the back of the house, managing 6 or 7 staff, which was fine because I'm also like a masochist in a way. This is another psychological revelation. I love pressure. I love intensity. I'm almost 57, and I'm still like super hyperactive, obsessive, kind of like, and that's probably all goes right back to the childhood, right? Where you have to stand tall at 6 years old because there's violence, things going
Yep.
directed at you, directed at them,
We
directed at them.
we stay in what we know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's my natural environment. So,
Hmm.
and I don't ever want to let that go because I'm self-aware in that sense, that I realize why I have a slightly obsessive personality. Even the dyslexia that I mentioned earlier, they say that can be wrought of childhood abuse and things like that. So I see the patterns, and I see that. But I'm tapping in. It's like I make friends with my demons, and it's
Yeah.
like, let's work together. Let's not be self-destructive. Let's be pro-social and egalitarian and altruistic and loving, but all at the same time, that angsty energy that I have, I love it. I absolutely love it, and I probably should go see a therapist about that, because maybe there's a moderation factor that could be, but I'm good at, I've managed
Yeah.
to make it part of my life, and it's
I,
okay.
I mean, I will share the where those types of behaviors become a problem is when we couple them with shame and guilt around them.
Ah, yes, yes, good point.
Right? So, I've had conversations with folks that, I'm ADHD. I have a hard time focusing. Like, I pick up something, and next thing you know, I've got 5 other things that I'm also trying to do at the same time, right?
Yeah,
And it's like, okay, right? That's fine. Like, if that's the way you are, that's fine. But if all of a sudden, you know, behind the closed doors, you're whipping yourself because you feel like you should only be focused on one thing and you're never able to really, like, that's where these things start to become,
yeah,
and I even hesitate to say problem, detrimental to one's life,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
the tuning is not, your engines aren't, your cylinders aren't all
Yeah,
firing.
I mean, I believe we are, I jokingly say this, but, Bruno Mars has a cute little love song, you're perfect the way that you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I believe that every single one of us are, right? What we see as flaws or, missteppings or whatever it is actually like, a perfect divine existence.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so, well, thank you for sharing all this perspective. So then you're like in this place of the alcohol consumption, using the narcotics twice a week. Where was that in comparison to this 41, happening, this chemical brain injury?
yeah, yeah. Well, I think I just got sick and tired of, because the one thing, and anybody who's out there who's used opiates will attest, that you just feel like shit sometimes, and especially if you're physically addicted, like if you're using daily and you've got to get that next dose. I never went there. They call it chipping, where
Yeah.
you're just using a little, a little, a little. Because again, I just did not want to become an addict in that sense, or substance misuse disorder. I didn't want to go there, but I also wanted to numb out, get effed up on whatever it was that was on the mirror that day, because I had another landscape business and I was running it I was just solo. And so I would go out and do mangrove jobs. I live in Florida, and chopping mangroves is horrifying. It is just absolutely the worst. But you can make $500 for 2 hours work, and but it hurt. It's bad for your body. You get impaled, you get beaten up, and blah blah blah. Same thing with trimming palm trees. You're up on a ladder, risking life and limb, for $15 a pop. So I would do a little bit of oxy in the morning and go and do my thing, and I wouldn't feel the pain. I just didn't feel it. I'm like, so there was a utilitarian purpose behind it besides just getting my jollies. But don't do that, because I'm 57. I've got cervical arthritis. I've got arthritis in my hip and my back. Because I'm out there like I can do anything at 35, and I'm out just like a monster, just doing stuff, and it's like, you stupid.
Yeah, the opioids are there's a reason that it's one of the, largest kind of like pandemics of substance use, and it's because so many individuals can justify the consumption of it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it starts often in something like, your friend's description. I have another dear friend who, after giving birth to her third child, had ended up having complications in a cesarean and ended up on them and struggled to come off of them for years. So like there's all of these reasons, and the medical industry. I some of the documentaries say that they knew, right? That the medical industry knew,
right.
but that doesn't mean that the doctors prescribing were aware. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
They wanted to
hmm
ameliorate a problem. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And that was the timing of the things, is when Florida's pill mills were big. That the oxy was everywhere. You
yeah.
could get it like candy. So yeah, and heroin was easily had. I mean, it was just, this was the land of opiates and honey, I guess, back then. And it's changed. But anyway, so to get to 41, I had sort of titrated out prior to 41, prior to this period. And but one thing I knew when I had this whatever happen, and I remember the day as clear as it was. It was a Sunday morning. Had breakfast. I took a couple of supplements like ginkgo biloba, or something ashwagandha. I don't know. And I had this just kind of weird, foggy headspace from like half an hour after taking these supplements. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then things just didn't seem right. Things were just a little off. And so that evening, I cracked open a beer and started to drink this beer. Um, had the worst reaction to the alcohol. It was horrifying. I don't know. I can't even describe it, but it was like my headspace was just shot.
Mm.
There's one analogy I use, like prior, not to the provocation of an alcoholic drink, but in general, this was like when you take a cold medicine and your brain fog and you're just not you, like Sudafed or any of these old cold medicines, and you're just foggy and disoriented, and you can't think right. This was that times five or something, and so I was just horrified. It was absolutely horrifying. I'm like, what? And it wasn't going away. It wasn't, like it was just a thing that you shake off and move on. And so yeah, the lead up was, reasonably not doing too much in the way of substance. There's a couple beers here and there, and like I said, I cracked one open on that night, and I was like, oh my god, what the hell's wrong with me? So I was stoic, and I sweated that out for a few days, and I realized this isn't going away, and it's getting worse, and things are degrading. And I thought, shit, what am I going to do? So I went to an Insta clinic, and gave them, they freaking offered me a Xanax prescription. I'm like, this isn't anxiety, bro. This is my head melting. So I was like, no. And so I went to a doctor, like a PCP, like regular doctor, and primary care physician, and had them, I ran through the symptoms. They sent me to a neurologist. Neurologist ran some tests on me. They put me through an MRI. Well, they found I had Hashimoto's, so that was nice. At least they were able to get that out of it. But they couldn't really, they thought maybe I had an ischemic attack in the cerebellar
Yeah.
region. yeah. So they were like, and then I went to a doctor that was, she was a doctor, but she would do uh, alternative type stuff like oxidative therapy and all these other stuff. And so I tried detoxing, and she had me for about 9 months, and I did peroxide IVs and different chelation things, and trying to get this whatever. I thought maybe I was just toxed up, and didn't do anything. And so all I could do was move through it, and it took years. And the worst of the worst was over within about 18 months. But there were times where I was sitting on the couch, and I would be sitting with my wife watching television, and it felt as though I was just going to absolutely lose control of my faculties. Like I can't even describe it. It's like I would just not have control over myself anymore. It was just horrifying. It was the weirdest thing. Um, so to this day, I have no idea what it might be. Now, the one thing that I came across my radar, because everybody goes to Dr. Google when they're terrified of something that's going on, and a few years ago, I looked and I saw that there's something called Hashimoto's encephalopathy,
Mm.
and it's more of a diagnosis of elimination. It's like, well, you don't have, Parkinson's, you don't have this, you don't have that.
Yep.
Maybe it's, and it was pretty much spot on. So maybe it was Hashimoto's encephalopathy. I always thought it was a black mold sickness because our house had been compromised by a hurricane, and there was mold in the walls, and we did a full tear out, did a reno, got all the mold out of there. I thought maybe it was the black mold. So I, to this day, who knows? But it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm through it.
Well, Hashimoto's in and of itself is autoimmune.
Yes.
And so if you've got a lowered immune system and then you go ahead and put that mold in place too, it could very well have been the combination of both together,
Right, right, right. So
right?
yeah, it was something going on. It could have been a creole of morbidities, this thing's coming together to do what they did.
I I am curious. Again, we talk about, you know, um, we're talking a lot now about the mind and the body and what your like mind and your body went through. But I am curious, Justin, right? So you've shared your story of, this, I mean, I'll call it what it is, this cyclical pattern of substance use that
Mm-hmm.
sounds as though it actually got worse as you got older,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I am curious if you were to go ahead, or maybe you've done this or maybe you haven't, and put a spiritual lens to review that experience, right? Because I'll tell you, like my guides and like are saying, you know, what a blessing,
Oh yeah.
because I don't I don't know that the next round of your experiment would have gotten out of it.
Yeah, yeah. No, because I was still nihilistic, still very angry, and it was kind of a paired descent in the sense that I was getting fatigued by having so much fun with all these chemicals, because it was weed, it was opiates, it was methamphetamine. I tried that, and I'm like, okay, cocaine. Yeah, I wasn't really into the stimulants. I was more into the let's,
Downers.
yeah, let's.
Yeah,
I'm so I'm like
I,
this anyway, right?
I
I don't
find
need
the
something.
highly sensitive folks tend to enjoy the things that take us down yeah, notch. So
my
yeah.
my my penultimate drug story is, and then I'm not glorifying it here, is I did a line of anhydrous methamphetamine, which is the stuff you're supposed to smoke and it keeps you up for 3 days. I just did a line of it, which is like 8 to 10 hours, and I snorted that so that I could trim about 10 pounds of cannabis with scissors for a whole day, because it's just like Adderall. It's like
Yeah.
you're ADHD and hyperactive. If you do a line of that stuff,
Yep.
I get convergently focused, and I wasn't going to be like a Jack Russell Terrier all day. I just sat there and just just trim these flowers all day
Again,
long.
again, like,
That's the
I
dangerous.
call out, you're not glorifying it, but I
No,
will
no.
I will say this is people use substances in very justifiable ways,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
You have to have a justification, right?
They abuse it in a way that they unbelievably justify it, right? And if we talk about alcohol, people are like, I mean, I'll give an example. When I decided to focus on folks in recovery, Spirit made it very clear that my one-on-one work, my deep one-on-one like mentorship would no longer be casual. Like folks had to be in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I had to go to my clients and have this conversation. And I had one particular client that became very rattled, and he said, "Well, I don't drink very often now, but I can't imagine like being at a wedding one day and like someone offering me a glass of champagne and me having to say no."
Okay.
And I was like, "So we are making up a wedding in some made up future." Again, like this justification, like we will find all of these justifications to hold on to these behaviors, even as um, unharmful as a glass of champagne sounds. This was my reality of going back to him. I was like, do you not see? Do you not like? Is that not concerning for you that you will give up a relationship today with something that has helped you heal for some theoretical future that you have no clue will ever happen or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um,
no,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, no, finish your thought. I'll
No, no, I was just gonna transition. So you are, on the other side. I asked, like, what's your perspective around like this kind of spiritual component, like of this, chemical brain injury that you had?
Yeah, yeah. This is probably the time where I can put my cards on the table about where I am in a spiritual life now. And it may be anticlimactic because I've had that interview series and I've talked to so many people during the throes of this illness, if you want to call it that, from 2011 to about 2020. I went to meditation conferences a lot to try to refocus and re-energize and get my shit together, yada yada. And so I went all over the place to these various meditation conferences, had a blast, met great people, had a sense of community, and had a perspective of spirituality that ultimately became very unsatisfying for me.
Mm.
And I am not necessarily what is it, left-brained as analytical, if we want to use that metaphor. I am deeply analytical because I don't know why, but I'm also, I think truly the real me is more of that. I'm left-handed, so I'm more that right brain, creative, out there, abstract thinking kind of person. But I am so drawn to uh, what would be to me more empirically relevant, to be more evidentiary plausible. It's just I want to see things that kind of make sense to me the way I sense make personally. And so what I've done with spirituality is I kind of walked away from that group with the meditating and this and that because it started out with this, and I'm not going to mention the guru person thing, and it started out with this sort of like you can change your life through your orientation of how you think and realigning yourself, stay away from stress and fight and flight, and go more into this parasympathetic to sympathetic to blah blah blah. And it started with that, and then it started going off into some really wild directions, and I'm like, I pulled back because that's just not how I calibrate
Mm.
the world. So I have a foot in each world where I have a foot down and again in the empirically as best as possible empirically sound world, and also one that we could call spiritual, and that is I'll focus on this spiritual for a moment. Um, all the fancy terms I would use like if I walked into a room full of people who wanted to talk about spirituality, say, "Hi, my name is Justin. I'm an agnostic. I'm an apophatic," and I'll unpack that for you. And so the agnostic is the ultimate nature of reality I don't have access to. I am on this side of whatever, veiling there is. So therefore, I can only speculate. Therefore, I can only use my imagination. And if it helps in sense making, then I employ that. Then the apophatic in me is a draw from early Christianity, maybe right before the scholastic period of Western Christian, not Orthodox, but Western Catholic and Protestant Christianity, which is to say it is a negative spirituality. It is where cataphasis is to say in the Christian context is that, God is the God of Abraham, and it's a masculine God, and it looks down in a very fatherly way, and it's prescriptive. It has these deontological prescriptions that, thou shalt and normatives and blah, blah, blah. Whereas the apophatic can say, I am in the presence of the divine, and I know not which I am, that which I am in the presence of. I just know I am in communion with the divine, and I'm going to leave it at that. So I marry the two ideas, and then there's something else called Pyrrhonian skepticism, which is to say that an absence of judgment leads one to a sense of ataraxia. Epoche leads to ataraxia is the Greek tagline. And Pyrrho of Elis and Sextus Empiricus just really get my tail wagging, because they ran into the early Buddhists, the Gymnosophists, when Alexander the Great went over into northern India. So here's a Greek in India with the Greek mindset, Western mindset, but he was vastly impressed by these Gymnosophists, or the naked philosophers, who were Buddhists, and brought that back to Greece and argued in the academies to say that if we let go of our desire and need to constantly have this empirical grounding and this knowledge, they're almost like the real skeptics to say knowledge is impossible, but that knowledge is tentative and contingent, and that we have to let it go in order to feel a sense of well-being. That's the ataraxia. It is the sense of fittedness into the world, even though the world is a freaking mystery and we don't know. So I take all of that jumble, and I ground myself in an idea that what I have access to and what is available to me is that which I have the most interactive capacity with. And so I started a primitive to say that my soul, my spirit, is my psyche. It is my mind. It is the ensoulment of me, is that which is interacting with the world, interacting with sunshine and the audience right now. I start with that primitive, and then I go from there. And where that goes doesn't matter, because when someone starts talking about the Palladian Light Council or the chakras or any of these other things, I keep it in the abstract sense, and I keep it as a symbolic heuristic or a teaching tool. I keep it as what the value is for me is that it has usefulness, it has purpose. So if somebody wants to talk to me about God the Father, the Abrahamic God, and sent his only son Jesus to redeem me in a soteriological miracle, fine, I get that. I can relate to that. But I'm not going to say, oh, well, then you've witnessed to me and now I must, I'm born again. It's like, no, none of that is quite literal to me. It is all our symbolic nature. It is all that which we use in communication, iconography, semiotics, semantics rather. All these different tools that we have as these, really amazing vehicles of creation. So it sounds kind of like I want my cake and I want to eat it too. Like I want to be spiritual, but what I can do with this is I just ground myself in a particular position that allows me to have conversations with everyone. Except for the extreme fundamentalists and
Well, yeah,
folks,
those folks don't want to respect.
No, I don't.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I just want to kind of relay back, right? So you have this drastic experience in your life, right? You realize, from at 41, you realize that you can no longer even tolerate these substances that once upon a time, you found some type of solace with. Even if you got bored with it, there was still something that was there.
I was still using, yeah.
You moved into this place of meditation, and then from there kind of anchored into your own beliefs, right? Your and I just, and the reason why I'm kind of mapping this out is because this is so unbelievably aligned to kind of the path and the conversation that I have. Yes, I identify as a witch. A lot of folks that, gravitate around my are going to dance in that kind of language. But ultimately, what I'm here to do is to help show and to mirror to folks that no one gets to prescribe. Like our path of spirituality is an individualized path, and the only thing that truly matters in that path is what you come to understand and believe.
Yeah.
And guess what? You also have the ability to change that at any time. Nobody gets to claim that. Nobody gets to dictate that, right? Whatsoever. And so this sounds like your journey, and that you were able to find this. And I'm assuming now find your solace through this. because of what you went through.
Yeah, as I think I mentioned it earlier, it was my master that showed up for me.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I'll say that might be a little provocative is I, in my skepticism, if you will, the Pyrrhonian, not modern Richard Dawkins obnoxious neo-atheist skepticism like that, more that it is I don't know, I can give you some answers, but I ultimately at the end of the day I don't know, and I love that space because to speak to what happened to me was born out of spontaneity. So it was born out of a concrescence. It was an actualization of all these prior decisions, events, and occasions, and outside external factors, canalization, attractor states, whatever you want, a big fancy language you want to use, that it all moved into this one place and one time, that there were options then available from that. So, I look at the future as probabilistic continuously. And it's
Yeah.
a lure. I love Alfred North Whitehead, and he talks about his idea of a goddish kind of thing is that this God is the eros. It is the lure that draws you into the future. That's probabilistic physics. It's what is potential, and what are the mitigating circumstances or contributing circumstances to a potential future, enabling constraints, all these different things. And so I look at it at what happened to me as this was the coalescence of a lifetime of decisions and external influences that put me in a particular position. And then I had a choice. I could have given up, gone the route of the vegetable, to be on a tube or to be in a diaper or whatever my situation might have been, and live out what I had left of my life. Or I could be tenacious enough and use the sort of virtual hardware and tools and machinery that were picked up along my life journey to extricate myself from that situation and move forward. And yes, I'm a doggedly stubborn human being, so that was the path I took. And it was a path that co-involved spirituality. It co-involved some wanting to know medicine and the physical science, the biology behind what the hell did I do to myself, or what the hell happened to me. And that's what I love about cognitive science and psychology is it's like I am obsessed with that. I listen to podcasts about Lacanian psychology and Melanie Klein and Freud and even Jung and all these people and their contemporaries to learn about the human psyche and the spirit. Because to me, psyche and spirit, like mind and soul, are what I would consider to be synonymous. And for me, it's just efficient. Because I can point to there's sunshine, there's that mind, that beautiful mind that is creating thoughts and ideas, and there's that other person, their beautiful mind is creating thoughts and ideas, and then there could be shadowy people creating thoughts and ideas, yada yada. So, but it gives me a tool of analysis that I can say, aha, I know what I'm engaging with at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't strictly apprehend or adhere to or reify things that would bind me to a position. So I have beliefs, obviously. I'm not a true skeptic. I know knowledge is possible. I know we have to have narratives and functionality in our lives. But I love to play with the idea that I don't know a damn thing. I don't know anything necessarily, but I have ideas and thoughts and propositions that I can put forward for engaging someone in a kind of dance of ideas. And from that, I think it's more fruitful, because if I'm not dogmatically wed to something, then I might be influenced or impressed, and I can walk away. And that's why, again, I love these podcasts that I listen to with all these big thinky people that can imbue upon me a new perspective. And from you, I get a new perspective or a new little shift in how I want to move forward.
Yeah.
Mentally. Yeah.
I love that. We've again, we could probably keep chatting for hours, Justin. I would love for you to kind of drop a nugget here, I think as you referred. There are folks that may be listening out here, and some of these folks may be struggling to step into a place of change, right? They may be experiencing their own kind of like self-torture right now. And there are other folks that may have made those changes but are struggling because, as you would kind of describe, maybe they're in that 18-month span that life just feels like shit,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do
Mm-hmm.
you want people to know? Like, if you could leave some wisdom for folks that are really in a place of struggle right now, in a place of suffering, what wisdom would you want to share with them today?
Okay, thank you for opening that space up, because I do. This is where I can cash in on the hours of obsessive onboarding of these cog-sci people. I'll start with the sterility of science and cognitive science for a moment, and then move up into the broader, more beautiful space of spirituality, and say that to my fellow travelers of this experience in life, and we are legion. There are many of us out there, who've dealt with this and are dealing with this. Now, I had a cheat code. I damaged my brain really bad so that I didn't have to be tempted by substance use. I would not touch anything ever except coffee, lest I incur the wrath of that substance on this experiential mind. I would be in a horrible space if I tried marijuana, opiates, alcohol. It would be horrifying. So I've been blessed. I've been so gifted with that capacity to never feel an ounce of temptation. So I count my blessings in that regard. So to speak to it, to what I call it addiction. I'm old, I call it addiction, but substance use disorder. There is an incredible guy named Mark Lewis, Marclewis. He is a cognitive science and a psychology major, and he speaks from experience. He was an opioid addict as a younger person. His work on understanding the cognitive and neuroscience of addiction is fascinating. And one of the things that we can take away from his work, and I won't speak too much to it because I don't want to do violence to it, but it is to say that we medicalize addiction sometimes, but it's also a very much a cognitive, and we also moralize addiction and substance use. But let's move into the cognitive science perspective on what's going on when we are in the throes of substance use and the dependency on that substance. One of the things he talks to that I find that is a teaching tool is that when we enter into substance use, something called reciprocal narrowing, that our perspective on the world tends to narrow down to you and the substance, because the substance is providing you all the satisfaction you need that nature ordinarily gives you when you acquire food, when you mate with someone, you find safety and shelter, i.e. the striatum, the ventricle striatum. I think there's multiple parts, but anyway, he's going to the brain, and he's saying that is the sort of distribution center of dopamine. And so when we are in the substance use paradigm, that ventricle striatum is occupied with this very short reward circuit, versus like seeking a mate, having a physical loving relationship with the mate, and then in nature you're producing offspring, or you're just reciprocating love and connection. But also with food and the satiation of food, that you get that satisfaction afterwards, which is the dopamine. Just like if you have sex, you have the satisfaction afterwards. The jouissance, as Lacan would call it. Also with acquiring safety and security, that you're getting this sort of sense, again, of jouissance, or the dopamine connection. Well, with substance use disorder, the circuity is much shorter and narrower, and that is that I have this immediacy of my opiate or my methamphetamine or cocaine, and I'm good. And why would I go to all the trouble of all these other things? So what Mark Lewis says, that the antithesis of this addiction is not sobriety or recovery necessarily. It is that there is connection. So that when we are coming back out of addiction, when we are coming back out of substance use disorder, that we are reconnecting with these relationships of either physical connection or romantic and loving connection, familial connection, of the satiation of the very simple things in life, like I just had a lovely meal and I'm sated by that, or that I have security, that I have a loving home, I have a beautiful space that I occupy, or there's a beautiful park, there's a gallery, there's art. So it's all these very subtle, sublime things that we sort of jettison when we get into the reciprocal narrowing. And I find that to be a nice, useful visual tool for someone in that liminal space of like, yay, like you said, carnival, lights, party, drugs are great, I'm high, I'm having a good time, to like, oh shit, I'm trapped, I gotta use every day, and I don't, it's like, I still feel okay, but it's kind of shitty. And then there is the recovery, which, by the way, I'll jump ahead a step here. Sober life, excellent, amazing. You will not regret your move into that life, because I've been sober for basically 9 years now, because I tried drinking alcohol after the major injury, and it was okay, but then I had the shitty thing happen, and I was like, so I can, pinpoint. Last time I drank a beer was in January 1st of 2017, so we're almost coming up on 10 years of absolutely nothing. And I have loved this chapter of my life more than anything. Now, I will say that I rerouted and redirected some of that compulsive behavior, which, to speak to that, the ventricle cingulate or whatever I was mentioning earlier is impulsive. It's more the autonomic, like, ugh, want food, ugh, get food, ugh, find mate, ugh, love mate, that kind of stuff. Whereas the compulsive behavior is a sort of higher order of metacognition, where you're like, I could really use a line right now, or I could really take a couple shots of tequila and things will, feel good. That's the compulsiveness. It's like you're like you were saying earlier, like I could be at a hypothetical, wedding scenario where I will be offered a glass of champagne, and, how dare I miss out on it? That's the compulsive nature. So let's be aware of all these things. We have the impulsive nature of, sex, food, and other things, that satisfy us. And then there's the compulsive nature where you're meditating on it. You're like, wow, but know that these are all connections, and that the way you moderate and engage with the connections makes all the difference. So that's probably a nice nugget there. And then let's move into the spiritual to say that what I find in my life is that the spiritual is also reciprocally narrowing when one is in the throes of substance use. I've come across people who say, oh, cannabis has opened up my chakras and made this and that. And okay, fine. Cannabis is relatively benign. If you want to try that, go for it. But having gone to those really fancy meditation conferences and spent an entire week just, like this.
Well, I've got to put this in, so
Yeah.
once upon a time, and because you're almost I think you're exactly 10 years older than me. So, but we still, when we grew up, marijuana was a different class of drug. It is not what is out there today. And so, yes, some people may have used this argument of like, oh, it opened up my third eye and, it aligned my chakras and all this kind of stuff. But in today, I am watching, Justin, more and more individuals step into the path of recovery from substance use disorder because they were abusing these very high THC that now start to mirror and mimic more so of opioid type of use, meaning the amount of numbing that it puts into place and the pain reduction, right? Some of these medications, like THC, has been used to reduce pain in cancer patients, right? So, like, I just want to put that little caveat in there that, people 20 years ago was a much different conversation around marijuana use than the conversation that exists here today.
Yeah, fine example. My wife and I, about 6 weeks ago, we went to, there's a group called the Grateful Dub, or that's one of their side names. And so it's dub, reggae style Grateful Dead, right? So who's going to show up to that show, right? My wife and I are standing in the middle of the crowd. All throughout the show, these people were probably 20 years younger than us, and just constantly joint after joint after joint, and it was just this cloud, and and I'm like, where's the fun in that? I mean, when like you said, back in the 80s when I was puffing along, you'd rip a couple bong hits, you'd smoke one joint among 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 puffs. And I was happy, it's fine, that was good. But yeah, they're getting lobotomized out there, and I'm like,
Yeah,
where's the fun in that?
I took a behavioral pharmacology. I've been going through training to become a recovery coach, and they introduce, if we were to look at marijuana back in the 80s, and I'll cannabis back in the 80s, the THC level within it was anywhere between 7 to 10%. And today, if you were to go purchase flower at a dispensary at a location, that you're going to be looking at closer to 25 to 35% in that flower. And there is, if you start getting into things like dabs and resins and things, you're talking at 70 to 80%. So you're talking 10 times the amount. I mean, yeah. So like once upon a time, people used to say, and I think confidently say, cannabis THC is not as harmful But I will tell you what is out there in the world today. Again, majority of folks that end up in my space, half of them right now are for alcohol and other substance use, and the other half are for cannabis. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And one analogy I like to use that might help people, I don't know if it would help anybody put anything into perspective, but it's like if I came across and I'm going, and I did consume cannabis all the way up until the 20 teens, the early 2000s, up to about 2009, 10. And this one guy that's passed away now, he sold weed, and they had a volcano. It was a vaporizer,
Oh yeah, I'm
and
familiar with the
so
volcano.
yeah, when you burn, you're combusting a lot of that THC, but the volcano doesn't combust any of it. It's all there. And I can remember getting outrageously stoned, and I'm thinking, this just isn't fun because I'm immobilized and I'm lobotomized, and
Yep.
I have to go do things and I can't function. And I just thought, so my analogy for me is like, okay, if you put 12 ounces of beer in front of me, I'm gonna know how to handle that 12 ounces of beer. Now, if you put a 12-ounce glass of vodka, 100 proof vodka in front of me, I'm going to handle that with a different intention. I am not going to chug a lug that 12 ounces of vodka, or I'll be on the floor in 20 minutes, or at least now I would. There's probably a time when I could handle 12 ounces of vodka. So anyway, it's that potency, right? Like the
Yep.
beer is 3% by volume to 5%, and the alcohol is 40 to 50% by volume. So you kind of have to know your pharmacology, like you said, if you want to keep yourself, if you want to play that game, and if this is a caveat to someone who's still using or whatever, be aware of what you're getting into, because I never found any pleasure in being that high and being that stoned. In fact,
No, I mean they're like it goes back to like to me it feels and looks a lot more like an opioid use
yeah,
of
yeah,
like trying to get to this place of like pure numbing. So
yeah,
um
yeah,
I want to go back you I because we caveated and I took us off the rails on that one. So you were talking about the spiritual, right? You
mm-hmm.
went through the whole mind and then the spiritual narrowly focusing as well.
I went to my first meditation conference, having meditated some, because when I was terrified by this phenomena that occurred, I started meditating because I had done it when I was younger, and I thought, oh, I can recall then that it brought me some whatever satisfaction, and so I started meditating on my own, and YouTube was there, and so I would go on to some of the things they had for meditations, and it was working, and then I went to a workshop, and the very first meditation, the music was really loud. There were 400 people in the room. Closed my eyes. We're at a round conference table. My wife was next to me, and closed my eyes. This guy's barking, whatever, about trying to get you. It's almost like a hypnotic, like hypnosis direction. Bark, 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 loud music. And so I'm kind of half listening to him, but I'm actually more focused on the music because it was the kind of music that helps get you, I guess, into a space. Oh my God, sunshine! I had this thing hit me like a bulldozer. It was a kind of a descendant experience, and it was a burnt orange strobing light with my eyes closed. Burnt orange, bright strobing, boom, 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 pulsing, like low hertz rate, but just boom, 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 like a strobing. And then I had this head-shattering braingasm that I could never put into words. It was just like a thunderbolt hit me, and I was like, holy shit, I was like, what the F? And my body was shaking. I'm crying and laughing at the same time. I'm like, well, as someone who's done a lot of drugs, that's new. And this was 4 years after the 2011, moment of reckoning. This was 2015. I was like, holy shit, what the hell was that? I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it. It just showed up. And then from that point on, and much like drug use, I was chasing that dragon for a while to see if I could get it back. And it happened one or two times in the following 2 or 3 years, not to the severity of that one. But it left me thinking, I'm like, okay, so if I pursue this lifestyle and I get into, a mindfulness space where I make this part of my life, that not that I want that braingasm all the time, but that there could be good things coming. And they did. I meditated a lot. I probably put 1,400 hours in 5 years. And I got to the point where I was doing 1 hour, half an hour to 1 hour every day. And the 1 hour ones were amazing because I would get into this minimal self content space where if you even thought you would ruin it, you know? So it was like you knew you still existed. There was a presence. But if you could just discipline yourself to not think, after you got down to this very, very weird level of being in a state, which I can't even describe, but maybe people who meditate can articulate it. But you get down to this minimal self-awareness, and as long as you don't burst that bubble by thinking or acknowledging that you're there, you can stay there, and you're not you. You're in this kind of really nice other space of whatever, and I love that. And I got there all the time, and I loved it. And so the one thing that kind of had me put it down for a while is I was actually getting so into the mindfulness practice that I was depersonalizing. I was actually becoming a little vacant. And I thought, oh, okay, so I need to find a grounding practice that brings me back. And I did. But it's been about 2 years since I was into the heavy meditating, and I don't do it anymore. But I will eventually re-immerse myself into that practice because it is a wonderful thing to do. And but I just don't feel the need to do it right now. And part of it was because I had started to depersonalize a little bit. I was starting to be a little vacant, which is fine. But it's you need your presence. You need to be you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, meditation in and of itself is gonna, if we think about chakras, is all very third eye and crown chakra,
Right.
and you can out of balance that, right? You can, so grounding exercises and practices, good food, healthy food, being present in our body. So I would love to know, Justin, I know you said you had your own podcast, but if we were going to get ready to bring this to a close, is there anything else that you'd like to share about your work or promote or, invite people into right now? I would love to give you the opportunity to do that.
I actually put together a website years ago in 2018. It was part of a trauma response, to say, I've been given this treacherous gift, and I want to pay it forward. And, so in other words, it was my recovery retrospective. It was kind of me speaking to myself, but if anybody else can use it. And it's a site called Illumin Life, and it's all audio exercises, and it's mostly me just babbling, but I do have some little mindfulness things that you can do that are kind of not meant to be good mindfulness, like, what a real mindfulness teacher would imbue upon you.
You
It's
want to
more,
spell that for us? I'll put it up
yeah.
on the screen.
Oh, okay, sure. It's ILLUMINELIFE.org. Illumin Life, like you're illuminating, Illumin Life, and it's all free. Of course, I have my hand out for a donation if anybody.
So ILLUMINE,
Yes, life, and then .org.
illuminlife.org.
It's all
There you go.
audio. Yeah,
There?
that's it.
Right?
Yep, perfect. Yep, thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I don't mind saying that because it's free. You can if you use it for a few weeks and you like it, you can give me buy me a cup of coffee or whatever. In fact, I don't even have an active payment thing on there, so it's free. I don't have anything. I had Stripe set up, but then that kind of got it fell off the rails or something. So it's free. You don't even have to give me a
Perfect.
donation. So, but it's just audio exercise. It's just me babbling about stuff. But it's all these things the insights that I've gained from my guests, from people that I've listened to, from some of the teacher meditation people. It's just brain dumping on my end, but it's like if you want to pick it up and it has some value to you, go for it, use it, because nobody's using it right now. I just did it more for me. I had to get this out.
Yeah, no, I get it.
I
I
even
get
wrote
that.
this 30,000 thing manifesto on spiritual. I point this way because I had a computer. It's over here now, but it's on this computer. It was Scrivener as a thing it's a package, software package, and it's writing software. And I blew out 30,000 words of just me getting junk. I don't think it'll ever see the light of day, but I just had to brain dump. But this Illumin Life is a brain dump that might have some value. And it's, again, you can put it on it's friendly to iPhones and Androids. And you can just put your headphones on and just listen to me babble. And there's some mindfulness stuff I make my own soundscapes. So
Nice.
forgive me if they're not that great, but it's just something to help you kind of
Oh,
get
that's
into a
lovely.
light inductive state. But it's just the culmination of my wanting to express what this has meant to me, right?
So they can visit your website. Is there any other way if folks wanted to reach out to you?
Well, there's the YouTube channel and Spotify, which is IdeaCast interview series, and that you can just probably type in IdeaCast on a Google search, since Google owns YouTube.
Perfect.
And there's an investment company that has IdeaCast, but I'm more. They stopped uploading podcasts to that thing, so I'm the other IdeaCast that's probably much. I have like 170 conversations or somewhere in that realm.
Nice.
And yeah. So there's bazillions of neat people on there. There's really neat conversations, totally inspiring people. So
Well, I love that. I love
yeah,
that. We've got your website that we'll make sure is in all of the show notes. We'll have the IdeaCast
okay,
YouTube there in the show notes. But Justin, this has been amazing, and I loved our conversation the first time. I love this again, and just thank you for sharing this other perspective, and how again just how recovery looks so different, but how each and every one of us have the ability and what I will say the responsibility to truly live our lives
hmm,
in a way that feels right for us.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And one micro tangent, just
Mm.
for anybody out there that's in that liminal space of recovery and you're struggling spiritually. Again, I went to a primitive for myself, but I'll go to even like a metaphysical primitive that you can start with if you're like spiritually ambivalent or not, you want to cultivate a spiritual practice, is think about this, and this is all speculation, of course, but in physics, everybody talks about energy. Oh, your energy, this energy, that. Well, energy is bound with information, right? Information for me is the jazz, right? Because I'm not an information theory person, like everything's information and bits and all this. No, no, no. It is a matrix of energy and information. So start with that as your little ground. Google those kind of things. What is energy information? What is the relationship? And go from there and build up from there, because that's what gets the little
I
hair
love
standing up
that.
on my neck. Yeah, and find the divine, find the sacred. You will, but
Yeah.
be a curious traveler,
No,
and do that.
I
So
love
that's my
that.
last little tangent.
I love that. Thank you so much again for joining us here today, Justin. I'm very grateful. And we will just say we will round out this way. From hopefully I speak on behalf of Justin. From both of us, much love to all of you. Have a beautiful rest of your day, week, month. Just have a beautiful life. So until next time, bye, friends.